Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome back to the Horus Heresy, book number 28, Scars. A brief reminder as well, this video series is presented to you by Manscaping, so if you're interested in any of their hygiene products, do have a look at the link in the description below. Now then, what are we up to with the Scars then? The Khan has ordered a breakout attempt to be made against the Alpha Legion fleet currently penning them into the system, and the pair of Khans, Torgun and Hibu, are discussing matters. Torgun is not particularly overjoyed by the fact that it seems as if the Lodge, of which he is, of course, a member, the Lodge in the White Scars, by the way, being a fairly large organization as well, has not been quite as open with him and some of the other members as he would have liked, because Hibu, a far more elevated member of this supposedly hierarchically free organization, he knows something. He, in fact, is talking about how they are going to side with the War Master, as the Lodge within the White Scars have not only already sided with the War Master, they know what's going on, and have been keeping it from the rest of the Legion. Oh, man, that's quite the thing. I can't believe that the War Master would have been willing to share such a secret, frankly. I mean, sure, it's the Lodge and only the uppermost strata of the Lodge, but boy, that's a big secret to have knocking about, isn't it? Oh well. And regardless of any would-be alliances made, they don't know about the allegiance of the Alpha Legion. They presume they're with Horus because, well, here they are. Seems a bit too much of a coincidence otherwise, but they do not hesitate to carry out their orders to enact the breakout attempt, which is quite the clever little thing. First, the White Scars move forward somewhat haphazardly, the various ships outspeeding one another. They are purposefully putting on a display almost incompetent-like, firing very long-range haphazard volleys, not really concentrating their fire, not really organizing their torpedo volleys, and when the Alpha Legion begins firing back, their fire begins splashing over the White Scars ships, which begin turning back upon themselves, falling back, abandoning their brethren. It seems like a completely disorganized barbaric charge almost, where each and every captain is complete master over his own domain and cares not one iota for the wider battle. But it all changes in precisely 5 seconds as the Khan sends out the warning to execute the Zhao. Near instantly, all of the White Scars warships in perfect unison spin and pivot to form a spearhead thrust straight through the heart of the Alpha Legion forces. The Alpha Legion had reinforced a segment of their front line with what appeared to be several massive battle barges, but taking into consideration that they were apparently already fighting the wolves, the Khan had surmised that these could not possibly be the heavy warships they pretended to be. And he was once again correct, as the White Scars shatter through the Alpha Legion's cordon and come out the other side fighting and firing nearly completely intact. If they wanted to, they could have turned upon the now isolated portions of the Alpha Legion fleet and annihilated, but they choose not to, heading instead out of system towards Prospero. The Khan wants some answers, and he thinks that is the only place where he's going to get them. Though before he leaves, he receives a communique from Lehman Russ, asking the White Scars to hasten to the aid of the wolves engaged against the Alpha Legion. They're even surprisingly polite about it, saying thank you, and urging them to hasten to their aid with all the speed for which they are so renowned. That's a almost begging letter from the Space Wolves. The Khan mulls it over for a second, not much more, frankly, before deciding to not hasten to the wolves' aid, instead sending a communique back that the truth is not clear to them, and that they have heard disturbing rumors of Prospero, which they hope are untrue. The Khan also says that at the end of this he hopes that they will fight alongside one another as they were always meant to be. And then, rather interestingly, for two reasons, he ends it with, well, he says to the astropath who's actually going to be sending the message, wish him a safe winter, or whatever it is they say to one another when they have finished speaking. For a Primarch who's so seemingly disturbed about not being treated with the kind of respect that he feels he deserves, he certainly isn't over-eager to extend that courtesy to others. Or perhaps, instead, this is an intentional snub. We know already that the relationships between the wolves and the scars is apparently a rather strained one, and when the astropath actually sends the message and translates it into whatever they say when they're finished speaking, the astrotelepathic message ends with "until next winter." That's a pretty bad way to end it. I'm unsure whether or not, again, was it intentional? Did they simply not know? Did the astropaths not know? Did they just, look up whatever the wolves were saying? Because until next winter, that isn't so much a, I wish you well, or a polite phrase as one might think. That is something you say to someone you don't necessarily expect to see again. Because winters on Fenris, they don't really end, do they? Oh, you have seasons. As in, you'll freeze to death in 2 minutes, and you'll freeze to death in 5. But again, until next winter, not necessarily the kind of thing you'd send to someone you just kind of hinted at may have burned down Prospero for no good reason. Though the astrotelepath also, bearing in mind that astrotelepathic messages are a combination of images, sensations, smells, anything and everything that the telepath can interpret. It is an emphatic sending, just as much, if not indeed more than a physical one in words and meanings and gestures, etc. And they also inform Russ that they believe this was an attempt at politeness, rather than a, frankly, veiled threat. And on the note of threats, we'll pop on over to Yasugai a little bit again. Him and his new allies have come to a common agreement that they need to strike out against the traitor legions and get more information about what is happening. Mostly in order to try and get Yasugai back to his legion, as he convinces the Salamanders and Iron Hands, who have now joined him, that they would be able to do far more effective damage to the traitors if they joined up with the White Scars Legion, already organized. And speaking of organized as well, there is a small mention a bit later on suggesting that the White Scars is one of the most centralized legions out there, with only the Space Wolves and the Blood Angels operating in a more gathered total strength. Not that that's going to be helping Yasugai anytime soon, of course, as he now has to look out for himself first and foremost. Fortunately, a target soon offers itself up to our would-be guerrilla fighters, a word-bearer's vessel. It is enticed into docking with a station, which they are supposed to be investigating, which is not making any reply to their hails. Whilst on board, they are ambushed by Yasugai and the Loyalists, who use the psychic power of the storms here to catch them by complete surprise, and then later on to take their ship as well, garnering them not only access to the inner workings of a word-bearer's vessel, with some interesting things we'll talk about later on, but also a few prisoners to use and abuse for information. On the less bright side, it's word bearers. See, if they'd captured world eaters, or sons of Horus, or hell, even maybe Emperor's children, they may have been able to gain some sort of semi-intelligent intelligence from them, but word bearers? Yeah, a bit too fanatical, that whole lot, but hey, a good step on the way, isn't it? And a good step on the way, too. There is a further little series with Sue here, and Quinja, where they talk about the inner workings of the Legion, and one of the reasons why the White Scarfs are so separate from the wider Imperium as well. One part of it details actually a scene of calligraphy, where Quinja is drawing out calligraphy, which is the art of drawing silly-looking things on paper. The Japanese are very fond of it. And it's supposed to be a very spiritual thing, which is it is described as here as well. Quinja has some very interesting things to say to Sue, as he confirms that indeed the fleet is heading to Prospero to get the answers. And they are looking to Magnus to give them to them, because they know what the warp is. That's why when they're told that Lehman Ross has turned, or Horus has turned, or whatever, they are far more able to believe it, ready to believe it, than most other legions would, because they know the warping influence of the warp. They know how it corrupts. They know how it can turn even the best and the strongest people into blood-maddened murderous monsters, essentially. But, nevertheless, they can't simply take anybody else's word for it. Especially also as apparently the primary reason for the divide between the Khan and the Emperor is, and I dislike the framing of this question here, apparently the Khan put it like this: can you rest an empire on a lie? That was his contention, with the Emperor deciding to push the imperial truth over simply telling everybody what exactly the warp was. Now, I need to do a proper a video at least on this at some point, but honestly, it is such a bloody huge topic that I'm kind of wondering where to start. I'm gonna have to write out a whole script for this, and god damn it, I am far too busy for that right now. But anywho, the thing is, the Emperor is not simply basing the Imperium on a lie. That is a ridiculous oversimplification of what the Emperor is doing. Because it's one of those things where the authors joke like, oh, the Big E, he lied to humanity. Ha ha ha, bad tyrant person. No, he didn't. That is not the only motivation. He didn't do this because he was some bloody supervillain. Oh yes, they will never know the truth. No, there is a real strategic motif behind this. Now, before we get into that as well, I need to give you a quick mention of the Storm Seers, which is what the White Scars call their librarians. The Storm Seers are very conservative in their pursuit of mastery, control, and knowledge over the great ocean, over the warp. They have a saying which I think is a really, really cool one. There are only two great follies: to pretend that the path of heaven does not exist, and to walk the path. The path of heaven, of course, referring to the warp and the powers beyond and so on. It's a very interesting saying because it makes a great deal of sense. You can't ignore the warp, alright, fair enough, because the warp is all around everyone, and considering it's the only real method of proper, faster-than-light travel, yeah, you can't ignore the warp. On the other hand, you must not succumb to it, because it is a malicious entity. The way the White Scars refer to it is that it is jealous, in a way. It is jealous and covetous of humanity because it can only work through humanity. And that is, of course, correct. So let us return to the wider question, right? Can you base an empire off a lie? Yes. Chad, goddamn yes. How many empires have been based on a lie. The lie of divine right, for example. The lie of nobility being better rulers, and etc., etc. Of course you can. It's a ridiculous question. Oh, you can only base it on truth. Nonsense. In fact, there was even a very good short story a while ago where a highly skilled iterator, an incredibly skilled speechwriter, was sent back to Terra by Horus after having exposed him to all of the horrors he could possibly imagine. He knew that either Dawn would not find it within himself to execute the man, because you can't let the truth die, and what this iterator had to say was the truth. But if he allowed them to do so, him to do so, he would cause incredible damage to the spirit and the morale of the Imperium. Either Horus would succeed in demoralizing his enemy, or in demoralizing his brother. For him, it was a win-win. Certain truths are damaging. Certain truths are dangerous. I mean, only a child would think otherwise. And let us return it to the topic of the warp as well, because here's the thing. If indeed the White Scars, as they say, recognize the fact that the warp is a corrupting entity and can turn even the most noble of people aside into its service, as it did with Magnus, which, amusingly enough, the White Scars don't ever seem to entertain the possibility that Magnus could have fallen, or that Magnus could be at the root of this, which is mildly amusing in and of itself. But if that is true, then the only way to defend against the warp is to not know of it, to defeat it before it begins its corruption. Because again, if it can corrupt anyone, even the most principled, even the most kind, even the most just, even the foremost of the Primarchs, then what goddamn bloody chance does the rest of humanity have? Oh, what is the White Scars proposing us? Oh, we just have to teach everyone that the warp is bad. Oh yeah, that's really simple. Hey, humanity, murder is bad. Doing hard drugs, kinda negative. Rape, bad. Violent crime, bad. Why can't we all just live together in harmony? Oh, that's right, because we're goddamn human. Okay, another thing to okay, maybe you don't tell the vast majority of humanity, in which case you're still carrying out the lie. Maybe you only tell the enforcers, the Primarchs and their soldiers, so that they can violently repress everyone else. Okay, well, welcome to 40k, I suppose. There is no solution to the warp problem that begins with, just tell everyone that it's bad and they'll avoid it. It's such incredibly short-sighted thinking. The only real way to defeat the warp, realistically, is to make everyone ignore it. See, here's the point as well. You can create a negative reaction to something. Let's say, for example, that, a hobby is being torn apart from the inside out by certain malicious entities with ideological motivations. Just an example I pull out of thin goddamn air, don't you worry about it. The best way to deal with that, theoretically, ideally, would just be to tell everyone that, okay, this company is doing something bad, they're producing stuff that the fans don't like, be it bad movies, TV shows, and they're ignoring the canon. Right, just ignore the product entirely. If everyone simply just completely ignored a product, the company would panic overnight and go like, holy shit, we put hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions, into this. Panic, panic, panic. Do something differently. It would absolutely be effective. Now, organizing a campaign of negativity to be like, this stuff is bad, you shouldn't watch it, etc., it is not the same as ignoring it. Ignoring it is just completely ignoring it. No negative PR, no backlash, no urging people to do anything, just complete radio silence, which is, of course, impossible. You can't do it. Okay, how are you going to tell everyone to ignore a thing without telling them to ignore that thing? In other words, creating the negative PR. Now, negative PR is, of course, a hell of a lot worse than positive PR, obviously, and I do not believe that there is such a thing as all PR is good PR in the current day and age. Information flows far too readily for that, and there are far too many ways to acquire products beyond the usual distributory routes. But nevertheless, the point is, getting somebody to completely ignore something is really hard, but also by far the most effective way to make sure it has no power. If nobody knows of the warp and its gods, which can only work through humans, has no power. Zero. Zip, nilt, null. And the handful of tiny, minute outliers, those people who still somehow figure this out, less than a billionth of a percentage of the population that delve into some hardcore forbidden and mostly burned lore, they'll be a hell of a lot easier to hunt down and find out in an entire galaxy that views what they speak as complete and utter drivel. Meanwhile, if everybody knows about it, every single solitary goddamn person will be tempted to explore it. Might think that they're better than it. Oh, no demon can outsmart me. Ha ha ha. And think of all of the temptations that could be created. Your wife is dying. Okay, maybe there's an esoteric spell to prevent that. Would you be desperate enough to find out? The resurrecting people from the dead, or even more easy monetary concerns, gaining wealth, fame, etc. All of these things that any demon could easily promise you, and would probably find tons of takers. Again, I need to delve deeper into this, because there are a lot more interesting little side notes and considerations and different points of views here, but at the end of the day, if you want to defeat chaos, the only way you're gonna do it is by not acknowledging its existence. But anywho, that was quite a little side leap there. Let's get back to the actual book, shall we? As it is revealed how the War Master has been communicating with the Lodge within the White Scars. A major lodge gathering is underway, and at the heart of it all is a strange pillar of unlight that it is described as being very difficult to look upon. We know what that means, don't we? And amusingly enough, it immediately throws us back to our previous topic, as the Lodge Master says that nobody should be worried. Now, it's just a little bit of warpy nonsense. Keep looking. The nausea is natural. It's nothing. It's not different at all from the arts of the Zadian Yaga, the Stormseers. Which is, again, the exact reason why you could never actually tell everyone, oh no, it's just bad, don't use it, because they'd go like, hold on, this does look an awful lot like that storm magic-y bullshit you keep doing, but I'm gonna move on now. The War Master's messenger, warp thingy, demon, whatever the hell he, tells them that their efforts are indeed known to the War Master and that he approves. Now, again, I have to ask, like, okay, this sounds like some pretty fucking major warp craft here, relaying messages in real time back and forth across these distances, and yet no Stormseer or Librarius, an entire fleet goes, my brain tingles. Hell, considering they managed to fool the Custodes with a warp ghost for God knows how many years, I guess this is on the lesser side of stupid, but fine. The White Scars do ask, what the hell's up with the Alpha Legion? We weren't informed of that, and the warp thing admits that, they didn't know that either. Alpharius, as it turns out, is unpredictable. You gotta love that. I mean, I get that Horus obviously would want any allies he could get, but when the Alpha Legion comes over and goes like, please, let us help you, maybe the correct course of action would be to reach for a bolt pistol. But, lacking that correct action. The White Scars traitors need to soldier on in the manner they best can. And the Lodge has built quite the little alliance within the various war bands of the Scars. There is a mention that they know that the Khan may not necessarily decide in their favor, so they want to help along his judgment by making sure that as many of his legionnaires as possible will already be on their side. Very specifically there. They want to make sure that there'll be such an uprising within the White Scars Legion as to, well, essentially force the Khan's hand in this, though of course they never put it quite like that. They simply mention that the Khan will of course see reason, he will make the wise decision, so on and so on, whilst of course all trying to conspire with one another to ensure that there is only one decision to be made. Even one of the Khan's closest allies from his time all the way back on Trigoris, Hasek Khan, is a member of the Lodge, though he takes his privacy within it a bit more seriously than others. He approaches the Terran Torgun, which is also of course a Lodge member, and shows him the silver medallion that he received from Shiban after the actions on the planet. He reassures Torgun that the White Scars had nothing to do with any of this, the Lodge did not do this, and he even goes so far as to guess that it may have been the Snakes, though of course he does not know. And he urges Shiban, no, that's not the one. God, these two characters, their way of behavior is so oddly similar, I keep getting them bloody mixed up. Anyway, he urges Torgun to go to Shiban and talk to him and try to introduce him to the Lodge. This is also on the urging of the Lodge Master, who tells everyone that they should spread the net further. They should be very careful where they go, who they contact, but they need their numbers to grow for the inevitable confrontation with the rest of the Legion. And talking about forcing the Khan's hand, there is interesting another little conversation that takes place on Ulanor between several of the Primarchs. Mortarion, the Khan, Sanguinius, and Fulgrim in a nice little silken pavilion discussing the ascension of Horus Lupercal. They discuss the ascension a little bit, with Mortarion in particular mentioning something very intriguing, namely that previously they all fought for the merest glance or a moment of attention from the Emperor, and that was acceptable because he was the Emperor, and no one was his equal. But now that they would be doing the same for Horus, their brother, that was going to cause problems. Very prophetic for Mortarion. See, Mortarion is often a little bit misunderstood. He's often viewed as a blunt instrument, a bludgeoning tool of a very boorish nature. And he's often presented as such, particularly in the way he wages war, but his mind is remarkably shrewd, I tell ya. He even hints at the fact that he was one of the primary agents behind Nicaea, though he doesn't want to go into any detail. Considering Sanguinius is nearby, that's probably wise as well. And the Khan says that if he was offered the honor of becoming War Master, he would refuse it, and he would not take it. Some of the other Primarchs seems to think that this is absolute nonsense. He would totally do it if offered, and frankly, yeah. No, I do not believe for a second that the Khan would refuse becoming War Master. Throughout this entire book, he has whinged incessantly about how he doesn't receive enough recognition, how him and his legion need so much more of it, whilst also never offering it to anyone else either, mind you. If he was offered the War Master's position, he'd take it. I think this is yet again one of... I don't know. The more and more I read about the Khan, he feels like a little bit of a bastard, honestly. There is a mention later on as well where... What was it? It's Fulgrim, I believe. There's a little wager going on amongst the common men that Sanguinius brings up in a moment of lacking diplomatic finesse, which is placing bets on which Primarch would win in single combat. And the Khan feels pretty sure that he could take Fulgrim. The Sanguinius had suggested, I would like to see the two of you fight, who would win that one. And Fulgrim says, anytime, I'd even go to Chagoris, so long as you build a palace to keep the dust off my shoulder pads. And the Khan takes this as a deep insult. I'm like, okay, are you saying that your tribal homeworld isn't dusty? Or you were like, oh, but he's such a peacock. Okay, but there's more mention that he doesn't want them to know how deeply their closed fraternity cuts at him. Like, he feels that he is on the edges of this brotherly friendship, and this cuts him deeply. And then, of course, he returns with, essentially, venom for Fulgrim, and that he would totally take him, because Fulgrim would treat it like a game, and he wouldn't. And he knows everything about Fulgrim. Like, okay, to be fair here, Khan, you don't offer anyone else respect either. Like, oh, people need to be kind to me and respect me. Okay, have you considered offering it in return? Or maybe trying to do it first? No, of course not. Little bit too much of the Perturabo in him, frankly. He is then also asked by Mortarion if he thinks he can take him. And that gives the Khan a bit of pause, as he realizes that the only one further from common notice than him might very well be Mortarion, and that he knows almost nothing about him. And considering we'll be seeing a fight between the two near the end of the book, that's a very prophetic question to ask. Spoiler alert, the Khan wins. Kinda, anyways. Though he did win when it came to the Librarius. Yasugai also mentions that if anyone ever wants to know who truly killed the Librarius, it was most certainly Mortarion. And Yasugai as well is having his own little problems as he begins torturing Word Bearers. God damn those two legions. Ha! Almost said eaters again. A Word Bearers legionary with lightning. Zappy zappy. He is pulled away from him by the salamander, who explains that, I get it. They're infuriating little shits, but we can't become like them. Actually, see, I've never really agreed with that argument. Oh, our enemy tortures us, so we cannot use torture against them. No, they started it. It's fine, go on. Lofty ideals of being better than one's opposition, etc. is all well and good, but when you're dealing with literal chaos heretics, certain barriers need to be broken down, shall we say. Oh well, good for the salamanders anyways. Yasugai is, kind of horrified at what he's doing, surprised at his own actions, and ever so slightly disgusted at them as well, and it's gonna get a lot worse from here on out, buddy. A lot bloody worse, but oh well, details. Meanwhile, the Iron Hand, Henricus, is fiddling around with a device that seems to be being cooled by blood and running on organs and little hearts and, the usual chaosy nonsense, that he eventually manages to activate and notices that it is some sort of mapping device, some sort of stellar map, really, that gives the location not only of the traitor fleets in real time, but also their potential destinations, that's the word, etc. Quite the discovery that, to put it mildly, as they now have a lot of information, and even better, they have a lot of information about loyalist movements. Loyalists movements that, frankly, the traitors should not be aware of. Guess it pays to have friends on the other side, eh? And the White Scar's fleet should be a lot easier to find now that it has arrived at Prospero. They see the world in its devastation, but encapsulated apparently in a Deus Ex Machina bullshit field. That's all I can really refer to it as we know that the planet was actually visited on several occasions after the wolves have left, but now, all of a sudden, for reasons of, again, plot, convenience, the White Scars cannot get down to the planet with conventional means, forcing the Khan to teleport down to see for himself exactly what has happened. He is then trapped on the planet and attacked by Sinuine, or more correctly, the ghostly after images of Sinuine, the horrible fly monstrosities that lay their little psychic babies inside of people's skulls and then have them burst out of them, although in this case they're ethereal. More bullshit, and can't be killed by anyone but the Khan, suggesting, yet again, that the Khan have some kind of psychic power. Though the rest of his bodyguard, at least some of them, are saved by another 1,000 Sun, who came to the planet after its collapse, again, bullshit field, and was trying to figure out what had gone on there as well. But with everything going on, that seems like it's going to have to take a back seat to helping the White Scars that so unexpectedly appeared on his somewhat reduced homeworld. Having lost sight of the Khan, or more correctly, misplaced him down a crevice during the fight with the Sinuine, the White Scars immediately ask if the 1,000 Sun can help them retrieve him. The answer is no, but also yes, because it doesn't have a whole lot more in the way of a choice. But, conveniently, a short period of rest and relaxation will be required before he can muster up his psychic powers once more, giving the Khan, who fell into another hole, ample time to talk to Magnus, who's also on Prospero, or, well, more correctly, a fragment of Magnus. I've heard the recent theory that the Demon Prince Magnus isn't actually Magnus, and it's one I very much so approve of, because the Demon Prince Magnus is the exact opposite, in every single solitary way, of the Magnus we see in the Horus Heresy. Hell, the very idea that Magnus would go up to the giant blue god demon bird thing and go, "Hey there, I know you killed a lot of my sons, turned the rest to dust, and imprisoned me in the warp essentially for eternity, but we're best buddies now, right?" Yeah, it's kind of like the whole Ahriman thing, isn't it? Originally, both he and Magnus, of course, were created by Games Workshop to just be evil villains, really. Though Ahriman always had at least the hint of a subplot to him, in that he wasn't doing all of the horrible things he was doing because he was just evil, but because he had the motivation of bringing back his brothers, or originally a purpose as of yet not quite known. He was searching for knowledge rather than just being a giant dooze nozzle, unlike Magnus, who was pretty much just a giant dooze nozzle, and remained as such all the way up until the Gathering Storm. So again, the idea that we could just take all of that baggage, put it in a hole, and chuck it out the airlock, while stinking a little bit too much of Abaddon is suddenly competent now, would be better than the alternative, where Horus Heresy Magnus essentially has absolutely no connection to 40k Magnus. Though even this one is clearly starting to head a little bit more in that direction, as he mentioned something very interesting. What was it? Oh yes. "I tried to warn my father, and this is the punishment I received," as he gestures to the ruins around him. It's not quite what happened. You were prodded by a warp entity to annihilate the wards over the Imperial Palace, thereby disrupting and destroying what the Shade of Magnus calls the Emperor's little experiment. Like, "Oh yes, I am blameless in this. I just blew up absolutely everything, collapsed the warp gate, made a ginormous chaos rift in the basement of the Imperial Palace." Over the little experiment that would have given the Emperor access to a complete, unified and repaired warp webway. Little experiments indeed. He also mentions that his bridges are burned with the Emperor and with Malcador, which I don't actually think is true, but the plot must soldier on, I do suppose. And the Khan himself, too, is very dubious about this. He calls out the Shade and says that you are not Magnus, you don't even sound like him. Interesting indeed. The many fragments of Magnus, the many different parts of his personality scattered throughout the galaxy. More and more, I really am warming to that plot line instead. Just wish that Fulgrim got something like that too. Poor Fulgrim. The apparition of Magnus rants and rails on for quite some time, stating that, he knows absolutely everything now. Russ is some kind of warp entity, as are, of course, his wolves. The fates had decreed that Fulgrim was supposed to land on Chemos, etc. He knows where the Khan is going to die, and so on and so on. Nonsense, I think, because he also, seconds before, said that he couldn't actually see the future clearly. It was like a maze, and he couldn't quite find his way through, even as he was trying to find a way to get back to the right side of things. This is a spectre of a psyker that doomed his soul by thinking that there was no way to change fate. I really doubt that he has all the answers right now, but hey. It's an interesting idea. The whole immutable fate versus malleable one is an interesting conversation, but ultimately somewhat futile, since you can never really prove it one way or the other. Unless, of course, you're the one making the universe and go, this is the way it is. But even then, you wouldn't want to reveal that, because it would kind of ruin a lot of things. Anywho, the whole conversation goes on for quite some time, until the Khan decides that he has heard enough, and begins to make ready to head for the surface to call the Legion to war, as the traitors have been revealed. The traitors being Horus, the ones that have broken their vows. Vows? Vows. Though I do find it very rich that the Khan ends this scene by not moving, being apparently depressed, and taking an extra second to gather himself because the dream has died. All of the sudden, the Khan cares about the Emperor's dream, does he? The dream built upon a lie and all that? God damn it. More and more, I'm starting to see the Khan as a bit too much of the Petarabo, absolutely. But anywho, whilst the Khan is busy down on the planet, his Legion is very, very busy as well, with the various traitor elements, amongst them, of course, Torgun and Hibu and, what was the other one? Hasek, yes, Hasek Khan, the original, making the ready for their rebellion. They have been informed that the War Master's troops are on the way to aid them, but they must seize control over the Legion first. They must make it ready to rejoin the correct side of the crusade. They figured that whilst the Khan is gone, they can get everything ready, and when he eventually reappears, they can simply tell him, Kagan, we have your entire fleet and all of your dudes. Please side with us. Whilst essentially holding a bolt pistol to his head. Even then, I suspect the Khan would have done what he eventually did anyway, but they are going to start by seizing all of the capital vessels, because if they are in command of the high ground, so to say, then the rest not possessed of the high ground DLC will of course be forced to surrender. Good plan, honestly, because if you're in command of all of the capital vessels, what are the frigates and the escorts really going to do about it? Not a whole lot. The Swordstorm, the capital vessel, is already under their command, frankly. The Khan's own flagship has already fallen, as Shiban launches a desperate attempt to board it via jetbikes shooting through the void from his own ship towards the Swordstorm. The White Scars on the Swordstorm order the enemy to be shot down, which surprises Shiban at least a little bit, and all of his brave men would have been slaughtered out there in the cold impenetrable darkness of the void were it not for the human logistical officer Sue, who opens a single boarding port, allowing the White Scars loyalists to begin swarming inside. They begin fighting their way through the ship, though even that doesn't really work out all that well. They make it all the way to the bridge, but they were allowed to make it all the way to the bridge. Torgun launches a counterattack to stall them, to ready the defenses on the bridge, then carries out a feigned retreat, catching Shaban entirely by surprise, because that is of course the White Scars methods, the very methods that Torgun had been arguing against. The flexibility of the Terran astounds him, and whilst he continues to push forward, noticing only too late that it is a trap, most of his White Scars have already been lured onto the command bridge, where they are immediately battered by heavy fire from all quarters and cut down in their dozens, only to receive, of course, another volley of fire from Torgun's forces, who have withdrawn in good order during their feigned retreat and add their fire to the rest of the traitors. Shaban's attempt has not succeeded particularly well, as the soul of the White Scars Legion hangs in the balance. A new force arrives on scene. Yasugai, on his captured ship, is rushing towards Prospero as quickly as he can, but he arrives with only one vessel, and the Death Guard in considerably greater numbers. A major fleet force with Mortarion at the head arrive and begin making their way in system, much to the surprise of the White Scars, both loyalist and traitor alike, who had not expected the Death Guard to show up. Mortarion teleports down to the planet to have a little chit-chat with Jagatai, to try and convince him to make the correct choice, to do what must be done. Though, to be fair, he doesn't even necessarily try all that hard, and sending Mortarion must have been not a very tactical choice, as Yasugai can immediately see that Mortarion has fallen prey to the very forces that he once tried to stop. Kind of mockingly, the Khan says to him that he could see the outlines of his plans, wasn't it, Mortarion? You even told me of it on Ulanor. Get rid of the sorcerers, get rid of those who rely upon their mischievous ways, and rulership would be handed to the proper men, the wise and healthy. But his plot has failed, as the Khan points out. There are more sorcerers than ever, and of a far less responsible kind as well, sponsored by the War Master, Mortarion's great hope. And the warp itself has now seeped deeply into Mortarion, and he can undoubtedly feel it in his own body now, beginning to corrupt him. As Jagatai describes Mortarion as seemingly filled by a febrile energy, twitching, his eyes glowing glossy and milky, etc. See, it's kind of like the whole Angron thing. I despise Angron's entire backstory, because his entire thing is, "We will never be slaves again!" He shouts to the heavens even as he clasps the color of corn around his neck. Mortarion's a little bit the same. "Oh, I hate them damn dirty psyker bastards. Nurgle, what's up? How about we join hands together?" See, the problem with giving the Primarchs more personalities is you kind of have to explain how they decide to turn into evil monsters as well. And more often than not, the explanation is that they were kind of retarded, frankly. Oh well. The two then engage in their little fight, and it turns out that despite all of Mortarion's supernatural abilities to stay alive no matter goddamn what, the Khan is the better fighter, and scores a mortal wound on Mortarion, which at the very least makes sure that he wins the combat, if nothing else. and frees him up to return back up to the bridge of the Swordstorm, where dramatic events have already taken place. The apparently failed attempt by Shaban and the Loyalists to take control of the Swordstorm has been reinforced by Gemulan Khan, who teleports his own warriors on board the ship. This is, it seems, the first moment in a genuine Legion-wide civil war, and the two sides open fire on one another quite quickly after only a brief conversation. The entire Legion may have torn itself apart right then and there, and the Death Guards who just arrived would have joined in on their own side, of course, or maybe they would just have hung back and laughed. Who knows? But after having defeated Mortarion on the surface, the Khan, with the aid of 1,000 Sun, is able to return back to the vessel, where he is also able, through sheer presence, to put an end to the fighting on the Swordstorm. And, as luck would have it, a common enemy has appeared. He orders all remaining White Scar's forces, and when somebody disagrees, he simply just stabs them. There you go. Problem solved. And the White Scars turn to fight the Death Guard nearly unified. The Death Guard having arrived in somewhat limited numbers to oversee the integration of an ally rather than fight a battle, and with their Primarch, Mortary, wounded. They put up a fight, but they eventually begin withdrawing. Yasugai and his friends aboard their captured vessel gets in the fight as well, and almost gets obliterated by a Death Guard ship. But the Swordstorm interposes itself in between them and the Death Guard vessel's guns, saving Yasugai and the rest of the Loyalists' lives. After the fight, when the Death Guard eventually retreat, the Khan begins cleaning out the Legion, though he does not have to do so with overwhelming force. There are those who resist regardless of anything the Khan has to say. There are a few ships that simply quietly slip away into the dark of the void. Others fight until the very end, convinced in their own justice, and some White Scars even take their own lives rather than receive the news that they were wrong, they were misled, or anything else. Some of the upper leadership of the lodges are, however, captured. The rest of the warring factions are genuinely forgiven outright under the understanding that they didn't know quite what they were doing, as the Khan sends out the knowledge of what Horus has become, and personally visits all of the major warships to explain to the crew that the Horus that they may have, upon a time, worshipped and thought of as a brother, has been turned into an evil, wicked creature corrupted by the path of heaven. The upper leadership is for a time seemingly consigned to death, but their ultimate fate is not known. The Khan states that there will be trials, there will be recompense had, debts will be paid in full, and whilst he has at least not accepted the notion of outright executing the leadership of the lodge outright, he does not eliminate the possibility. Yasugai also suggests perhaps using them as a sort of forlorn hope. Those commanders whose position means that they cannot be forgiven, yet whose experience and veterancy would also make it a nasty loss to the Legion to simply kill them, could be sent out ahead of the Legion as outriders to throw themselves at the enemy to regain their honor in death. A wise decision, certainly. And so the White Scars have found their purpose. They have unified once more and will enter the war as a relatively intact and harmonious force. Though it's going to be a long-ass time until we hear of that again. Hey, at least the White Scars got a book in the first, 30 of them. The Iron Hands are still sitting there like, oh, we go with a short story. I know, Iron Hands, I feel bad for you as well, I really, really do, but, well, Such is life under Games Workshop. Until next time, I have been Arch. Thank you all very much for listening, and I hope to see you all again soon. Till then, have a good day.